Have you ever looked into the eyes of the people who gave you life, only to realize they were actively draining yours to feed their favorite child? I died penniless and alone in a state-run hospice, crushed under $500,000 of debt. My parents tricked me into taking on for my sister. My last memory was the echo of their cold, dismissive laughter over the phone as my organs failed. But then, I woke up. 5 years in the past, and I didn't come back alone. I brought back a terrifying, impossible gift. Whatever lie my parents told me to manipulate my life, I could make it absolute, terrifying reality. They thought they were playing me. They didn't know they were writing their own doom. The smell of cheap bleach and decaying hope is something you never forget. It clings to your skin, settles in the back of your throat, and becomes the only air you breathe. That was my reality in room 314 of St. Jude's Palliative Care Center. I was 26 years old, and I was dying. My kidneys were shutting down, a direct result of stress-induced hypertension and years of skipping my own meals to pay off a mountain of predatory loans. Loans I had never wanted. Loans that bore my signature, but paid for the lavish, glamorous life of my older sister, Abigail. I stared at the water stains on the acoustic ceiling tiles, my breathing shallow and ragged. My phone sat on the bedside table, a cracked piece of plastic that hadn't rung in 3 months. The last time I spoke to my mother, Margaret, she had sighed heavily into the receiver. "Chloe, you're being dramatic. Abigail needed that boutique to launch her fashion line. You know she's fragile. You're the strong one. We'll pay you back when the business takes off." The business didn't take off. Abigail spent the loan on a month-long trip to the Amalfi Coast with her fiancé, leaving me holding the bag when the creditors came knocking. When the stress broke my body, my parents, Richard and Margaret Harding, simply stopped answering my calls. They changed their numbers. They moved to a gated community in Scottsdale. They left their strong daughter to rot. A sharp, stabbing pain ripped through my abdomen. The heart monitor beside me began a frantic, high-pitched scream. I tried to reach for the call button, but my fingers were numb, heavy as lead. My vision tunneled. In the creeping darkness, a profound, unadulterated rage ignited within me. It wasn't fair. I had been the perfect daughter. I had obeyed. I had trusted them. I had swallowed their lies whole, believing that family meant sacrifice. If I had another chance, I thought, as the coldness rushed up my neck and pulled me under, I would never believe them again. I would make them choke on every single lie. Then, the monitor flatlined into a solid, continuous hum. The darkness took me. Gasps. I shot up in bed, my lungs pulling in a massive, greedy gulp of cool, clean air. I scrambled backward, my hands tangling in soft, expensive Egyptian cotton sheets. I wasn't in the dingy hospice bed. I wasn't attached to IV drips. I was in my old bedroom at my parents' house in Oak Brook, Illinois. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting golden geometric patterns on the hardwood floor. I looked down at my hands. They were full, healthy, unblemished by needle marks or the pale pallor of imminent death. Trembling violently, I reached for the nightstand and grabbed my phone. It wasn't cracked. The date on the screen glared back at me. The 14th of October 2021. I dropped the phone. It hit the rug with a soft thud. 5 years. I had regressed exactly 5 years. October 14th was a date permanently burned into my psyche. It was the day of the infamous family dinner. The night my father, Richard, sat me down and fed me the lie that ruined my life. The night I signed over my future. I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked over to the full-length vanity mirror. Staring back at me was a 21-year-old Chloe, fresh out of college, holding a trust fund left by my late grandfather, and utterly naive. But the eyes looking back at me weren't naive anymore. They were cold. They were dead. They belonged to a ghost who had clawed her way out of a grave. As I stared at my reflection, a strange electric hum vibrated at the base of my skull. It wasn't a headache. It felt like a locked door in my mind had suddenly swung wide open. A whisper of intuition, clear as a bell, echoed in my consciousness. The scale is balanced. Their deception is your weapon. Accept the lie, and reality will bend. I didn't fully understand it yet, but I could feel the truth of it humming in my veins. The universe, in its infinite chaotic justice, had sent me back with a failsafe. My parents' greatest weapon against me was their ability to lie with a straight face. Now, I held the detonator. I walked to my closet and pulled out a simple, understated navy dress. If tonight was the night I was meant to walk to the slaughterhouse, I would make sure I dressed appropriately for their funeral. The smell of rosemary and roasted lamb wafted up the grand staircase. Margaret always cooked a lavish meal when she was preparing to orchestrate a financial execution. I descended the stairs slowly, my hand gliding over the polished mahogany banister. I could hear the clinking of crystal glasses and the low murmur of my father's voice in the formal dining room. I paused in the doorway. There they were. Richard Harding, looking distinguished with his silver-templed hair and expensive bespoke suit. Margaret Harding, dripping in Cartier, her face a mask of practiced maternal concern. And there, picking at her salad with a look of supreme boredom, was Abigail. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out, her manicured nails tapping against her phone screen. "Ah, Chloe," my father said, looking up with a perfectly engineered smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Join us, sweetheart. Your mother made your favorite." It wasn't my favorite, it was Abigail's favorite. But I smiled, pulled out my chair, and sat down. "Smells wonderful," I lied smoothly. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation was excruciatingly normal. They asked about my job hunt, offering condescending advice while praising Abigail's vague, non-existent plans to become an influencer. I ate quietly, waiting for the curtain to rise on their main act. Right as Margaret cleared the salad plates, Richard sighed heavily. He took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. "Chloe," he began, his voice thick with artificial sorrow, "there's something we need to discuss as a family. Something incredibly difficult. Here it comes." I put down my fork, arranging my face into an expression of innocent concern. "What is it, Dad? You look terrible." He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His skin felt like a snake's. "It's the company, honey. Caldwell Enterprises. It's gone. I made a terrible miscalculation with an overseas shipping syndicate in Singapore. The cargo was lost, and our partners defrauded us. We are facing total, catastrophic ruin. The bank is moving to freeze our accounts tomorrow morning. We are completely bankrupt. We'll lose this house by the end of the month." Margaret let out a perfectly timed, dramatic sob, dabbing her dry eyes with a silk napkin. Abigail looked up, briefly annoyed that her inheritance might be in jeopardy, though she already knew the script. In my previous life, this was the moment my heart shattered. I had cried. I had hugged my father, and when he inevitably asked me to use my grandfather's protected trust fund as collateral for a $500,000 bridge loan to save the house, I signed the papers without reading them. The shipping company lie was just that, a lie. He had needed the money to pay off a massive gambling debt and buy Abigail a condo in Manhattan. This time, I didn't cry. I looked at his hand resting on mine. The hum at the base of my skull flared into a roaring inferno. The power felt heavy, tangible, waiting for my command. He wants to be bankrupt, I thought. Let him be. I looked up, meeting his calculating eyes. I let a single, perfect tear roll down my cheek. "Oh my God, Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling with feigned devastation. "I believe you. That is absolutely tragic. You are completely bankrupt. You have nothing." The moment the words left my lips, the air in the dining room seemed to warp. A subtle, silent shockwave rippled outward from my chest, distorting the light from the chandelier for a fraction of a second. I felt a cold rush of energy leave my body, locking the lie into the fabric of the universe. Richard gave a sad, martyr-like nod. "It is, sweetie. And that's why I need—" His phone, resting on the table next to his wineglass, suddenly erupted into a frantic ringing. He frowned, irritated by the interruption. He glanced at the caller ID, and his annoyance shifted to confusion. "It's Ari," he muttered. Ari Pendleton was his chief financial officer. "Ignore it, Richard," Margaret hissed, wanting to close the trap on my trust fund. I can't. He's calling on the emergency line, Richard said, picking up the phone and answering it on speaker. Ari? I'm in the middle of dinner. What is it? Ari's voice crackled through the speaker, breathless and steeped in absolute terror. Richard, turn on the news, the financial networks. It's the Singapore Syndicate, the Vandalay Shipping Group. They just filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The CEO was arrested for massive wire fraud half an hour ago. Richard froze. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Ari, what are you talking about? We didn't actually invest heavily in Vandalay. We only hold a minor, shell position. Not anymore, Ari screamed. Someone authorized a massive leverage play this morning. Our entire liquid capital was tied into their futures. Richard, the SEC just froze our corporate accounts 10 minutes ago. The bank is triggering the default clause on the house. We have zero liquidity. We are utterly, totally bankrupt. It's over. The phone line went dead. Silence slammed into the dining room like a physical weight. Margaret's jaw was practically resting on her chest. Abigail's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto her plate. Richard sat frozen, his eyes wide and unseeing. He couldn't comprehend it. The lie he had meticulously crafted to steal my money had just manifested into reality with surgical precision. I picked up my fork and calmly took a bite of the roasted lamb. Wow, I said softly, chewing slowly. It's a good thing I believed you, Dad. You really are broke. The next 48 hours in the Harding household were a masterclass in hysteria. The illusion of our perfect, wealthy suburban life violently shattered. The oak-paneled walls of my father's study echoed with his frantic screaming as he berated lawyers, bankers, and anyone who would answer his calls. But the truth was inescapable. The money was gone. Caldwell Enterprises was a crater, and the family estate was collateral damage. I watched the chaos unfold with a serene detachment. I spent my days reading by the window, sipping Earl Grey tea while movers, sent by the bank, began appraising the antique furniture. My parents hadn't approached me about my trust fund yet. The shock of their fake bankruptcy becoming a reality had paralyzed their original scheme. But rats, when cornered, always find their way back to the cheese. On the third morning, Abigail finally broke. She stomped down the stairs in a silk robe, her face red with fury. "Mom!" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the half-empty foyer. My Amex Black Card was just declined at Neiman Marcus. The SA looked at me like I was a peasant. "What is going on?" Margaret rushed out of the kitchen, looking haggard. Her hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was a messy nest. "Hush, Abby. Honey, please. Your father is dealing with a temporary liquidity issue. I don't care about his liquidity." Abigail screamed, stomping her foot. "I have a trip to Paris booked for next week. I need money." From my spot in the adjoining sunroom, I watched Margaret's eyes dart around desperately. Her gaze landed on me. I could practically see the rusty gears in her head turning. The original plan to steal my trust fund to cover a fake bankruptcy was now useless because the bankruptcy was real and my trust wasn't enough to save a multi-million-dollar corporation. But it was enough to maintain Abigail's luxurious lifestyle and keep the illusion of their wealth alive for a few more months while they hid assets. Margaret approached me, her face shifting instantly from panicked enabler to a mask of profound, tragic, motherly grief. It was chilling how quickly she could switch it on. She sat across from me, reaching out to grasp my hands. Her grip was tight, desperate. "Chloe, darling," she whispered, forcing tears to well up in her eyes. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your father's financial ruin. It's taking a toll on all of us, but it's destroying your sister." I tilted my head, feigning ignorance. "Abigail? She seems just fine. Very vocal about her credit cards." Margaret shook her head frantically. No. She's putting on a brave face. "Chloe, I didn't want to tell you this, but the doctor called earlier. Abigail has developed a severe, life-threatening heart arrhythmia from the acute stress. Her heart is literally failing. She needs immediate, specialized care at the Wellington Clinic in Switzerland. It's entirely out of pocket, and with our accounts frozen. Chloe, if you don't sign over your trust fund to pay for her treatment, your sister will die by the end of the month. I stared at my mother. I remembered lying in Street Jude's, my kidneys failing, begging Margaret over the phone to come visit me. I remembered her telling me I was being dramatic. I remembered Abigail posting photos of herself drinking champagne on a yacht while I was vomiting blood into a plastic basin. Her heart is failing. A cold, vicious smile tugged at the corners of my mind, though my face remained a portrait of shock. The hum at the base of my skull awoke, vibrating with a dark, eager energy. My mother was serving her golden child to the altar of my power. "Mom," I breathed, my voice barely above a whisper. I squeezed her hands back, looking deeply into her lying eyes. I had no idea. A failing heart? I believe you. It must be agonizing for her. The air in the sunroom fractured. A heavy, invisible pressure descended upon the house, making my ears pop. The power surged out of me, dark and absolute. I believe you. Let her heart fail. For a split second, nothing happened. Margaret looked relieved, her tearful facade cracking into a tiny, victorious smirk. "Thank you, Chloe. I knew you would step up. Let me just get the transfer papers." A horrific, guttural shriek tore through the silence of the house. It came from the foyer. Margaret jumped, ripping her hands from mine. We both ran to the archway. Abigail was halfway up the grand staircase. She wasn't screaming about her credit cards anymore. Her hands were clawing frantically at her chest, ripping the delicate silk of her robe. Her eyes were wide, bulging with a sudden, incomprehensible terror. "Mom!" Abigail gasped, her voice completely devoid of air. "Mom! It hurts!" It hurts so much. She collapsed, her knees buckled, and she tumbled down the last 5 hardwood steps, hitting the marble floor of the foyer with a sickening thud. She writhed on the ground, her perfectly manicured hands clutching her sternum. Her lips, usually painted a glossy pink, were rapidly turning a terrifying shade of bruised blue. "Abigail!" Margaret screamed, a raw, entirely genuine sound of absolute horror. She threw herself onto the floor next to her favorite daughter. "Abigail, what is it? What's happening?" "Can't breathe." Abigail choked out, a thin line of spittle running down her chin as her chest heaved violently, her heart failing to pump blood through her body. My father ran out of his study, dropping his phone. "What the hell is going on? Call an ambulance, Richard. Call 911. Margaret shrieked, cradling Abigail's head as the girl began to convulse, her body fighting a losing battle against the reality her mother had just created. I stood in the archway, my arms crossed loosely over my chest. I watched the paramedics arrive 10 minutes later. I watched them hit Abigail with the defibrillator paddles right there on the Persian rug. I watched my parents weep genuine tears as their world burned down around them. The lies they spun were finally catching up to them, and I was only just getting started. The intensive care unit at Northwestern Memorial Hospital smelled faintly of iodine and sterile desperation. It was a sharp contrast to the smell of my own rotting death in the previous timeline, but the ambient soundtrack of rhythmic, synthetic breathing was exactly the same. I stood by the glass partition, a lukewarm cup of bad cafeteria coffee in my hands, watching the chaotic scene unfold inside room 412. Abigail was a mess of tubes and wires. The golden child, who just yesterday was screaming about Neiman Marcus and Parisian vacations, was now entirely dependent on an ECMO machine to pump the blood her failing heart could no longer handle. Her skin had taken on a terrifying translucent pallor, and her lips were cracked and dry. Margaret sat beside the bed, her face buried in her hands, her designer blouse stained with her own makeup and tears. Richard was pacing the hallway outside the room, his phone glued to his ear. He looked like a man who had aged a decade in 48 hours. His silver hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his tie loosened and hanging crookedly around his neck. He ended a call, slamming his fist against the wall in a rare display of uncontrolled rage. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling nothing. No pity, no anxiety, just the cold, clinical observation of an experiment running its course. Margaret emerged from the room a few minutes later, looking hollowed out. She spotted me leaning against the wall and rushed over. I could see the frantic, calculating gleam return to her eyes. Grief hadn't suppressed her manipulative instincts. It had sharpened them. "Chloe," she rasped, grabbing my forearm with bruising force. "Chloe, you have to help us. Please." "I'm here, Mom," I said smoothly, my voice a perfect imitation of a supportive daughter. "What's wrong? Is Abigail getting worse?" Margaret looked left and right, ensuring no nurses were within earshot. She pulled me closer. "It's not just her health, darling. It's the hospital. Your father just got off the phone with Dr. Sterling, the head of cardiology." I raised an eyebrow. And because of the bankruptcy, Margaret lied, her voice dropping into a register of flawless, manufactured panic. The insurance company retroactively cancelled our entire policy. They claimed fraud. The hospital board just held an emergency meeting. She paused, squeezing my arm tighter, letting a single dramatic tear spill over her lashes. "Chloe, they are ruthless. Dr. Sterling said that because we are completely uninsured and your father's assets are frozen, they are officially discharging Abigail in 20 minutes. They are pulling her off life support and wheeling her out onto the street. She will die on the sidewalk, Chloe, unless we can provide a $500,000 cash retainer immediately to keep her in the ICU. Your trust fund is the only liquid cash we have left." It was a brilliantly constructed lie. It preyed on my empathy, established a ticking clock, and presented my money as the only savior. In my past life, I would have been sprinting to the bank, signing over every cent my grandfather left me to save my sister from such a barbaric fate. But hospitals, especially world-class institutions like Northwestern, don't throw critical patients onto the pavement. There are laws. There are ethics. Margaret knew this, but she was banking on my ignorance and panic. She was handing me another loaded gun, begging me to pull the trigger. The electric hum at the base of my skull roared to life, vibrating with a dark, eager frequency. I looked deeply into my mother's terrified, lying eyes. I let my face crumble into an expression of absolute horror. "They're kicking her out?" I whispered, my voice shaking perfectly. "They're going to pull the plug and dump her on the street? That is inhuman." "I believe you, Mom. I believe they're doing it right now." The air in the hallway shifted. It wasn't a sound, but a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure, like the moment before a violent thunderstorm breaks. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, plunging the hallway into a split second of darkness, and then returned. Margaret let out a breath of relief, her grip on my arm loosening. "Thank God, Chloe. I knew you wouldn't let her die. Now, quickly, let me call the bank." "Excuse me." "Mrs. Harding?" Margaret and I turned. Standing behind us was a tall, severe-looking woman in a tailored grey suit. She wore a badge that read Hospital Administration. Behind her stood 4 large, imposing hospital security guards. Their eyes were blank, completely devoid of empathy. The reality I had just authorized had overwritten their humanity. "Yes?" Margaret asked, her voice faltering. "Who are you?" "I am the Director of Patient Admissions," the woman said in a flat, robotic tone. "As your insurance policy has been retroactively voided, and you possess no visible means of financial compensation, your daughter, Abigail Harding, is hereby discharged from Northwestern Memorial Hospital, effective immediately." Margaret stared at her, a nervous, confused laugh bubbling from her throat. "What? No, you can't do that. She's on life support. She'll die. This is a private institution." "Not a charity, Mrs. Harding," the administrator replied coldly. She nodded to the security guards. "Disconnect the patient and remove her from the premises." "Wait!" Margaret shrieked, the reality of her own lie finally crashing down on her. "No! My daughter is getting the money. Chloe, tell them." I took a step back, my face a mask of helpless shock. I don't have it on me. It takes days to wire that much." The security guards pushed past Margaret, ignoring her frantic grabbing. They marched into room 412. Richard, who had been watching from down the hall, sprinted over. "What the hell is going on?" he bellowed, trying to body block the doorway. A guard twice his size effortlessly grabbed Richard by the lapels and shoved him hard against the wall, pinning him there. Inside the room, a nurse with dead, vacant eyes calmly stepped up to the ECMO machine and hit the power switch. The rhythmic, synthetic breathing stopped. The room was suddenly plunged into an eerie silence, save for the frantic, flatlining scream of the heart monitor. "No! No! Stop!" Margaret wailed, throwing herself at the guards. They ignored her. With brutal, terrifying efficiency, they unhooked Abigail from the wall monitors. They didn't bother removing the IVs, they just severed the lines. Abigail, barely conscious, began to gasp for air like a fish out of water. Her chest heaved, her eyes rolling back into her head. "Please," Richard begged, tears streaming down his face as the guard held him back. "I'll get the money, I swear to God. Just leave her hooked up." "Discharge complete," the administrator said. The guards grabbed Abigail's hospital bed and rolled it roughly out of the room. They moved at a brisk pace down the hallway, ignoring the horrified stares of other patients and staff, whose realities had been subtly bent to ignore this blatant violation of medical ethics. Margaret and Richard chased after the bed, screaming, begging, sobbing. I followed at a leisurely pace, my coffee still warm in my hand. We reached the ground floor. The automatic sliding doors of the main entrance hissed open, letting in a blast of freezing Chicago autumn air. The guards pushed the bed straight through the doors, out onto the concrete drop-off zone. With a final, violent shove, they pushed the bed away from the entrance. The wheels locked, bringing the bed to a jarring halt on the cold pavement. The guards turned on their heels and walked back inside, the glass doors sliding shut and locking behind them. Margaret collapsed onto the concrete beside the bed, cradling Abigail's suffocating face. "Help! Somebody help us!" she screamed into the wind. Richard fell to his knees, pulling out his phone with shaking hands to dial 911. I stood on the curb a few feet away, watching my sister turn blue under the grey afternoon sky. My mother had asked for a tragedy to extort me. The universe, through me, had simply delivered her exact request. It took a city ambulance 20 minutes to arrive. By the time they loaded Abigail into the back, she was barely clinging to life. Because Northwestern had legally discharged her, the paramedics had no choice but to transport her to the nearest public facility, Cook County General. It was a stark downgrade. The gleaming, state-of-the-art corridors of Northwestern were replaced by flickering fluorescent lights, peeling linoleum floors, and the smell of industrial bleach failing to mask the scent of human suffering. Abigail was stabilized, but barely. She was shoved into a crowded ward, hooked up to a rudimentary ventilator. My parents were broken, but beneath their grief, a toxic, venomous paranoia was beginning to brew. Richard, always the predator, could sense that something was deeply wrong. He didn't understand the physics of my power, but he understood cause and effect. Since the dinner where he tried to steal my money, every single move he made had imploded with impossible, catastrophic precision. And through it all, I remained perfectly, unnervingly fine. The next morning, I received a text from Richard. "Come to the house. We need to talk about your sister's legal options. Come alone." I knew it was a trap. The bank had officially foreclosed on the Oak Brook estate, and movers had been clearing out the furniture for 2 days. It was the perfect place for a private, desperate confrontation. I drove my modest Honda Civic up the winding driveway. The massive oak front doors were propped open. I walked inside. The grand foyer where Abigail had collapsed just days prior was entirely empty. Our voices echoed against the bare walls. "Dad?" I called out, stepping into the living room. Richard was standing by the fireplace. He looked ragged, feral, but he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was a man in a cheap, rumpled grey suit. He had a thick neck, a buzz cut, and eyes that looked like dirty pennies. I recognized him from a few of my father's golf outings in my past life. Detective Greg Miller, Chicago Police Department. He was a fixer, a man who made DUI charges for my father's wealthy friends disappear for a price. "Sit down, Chloe," Richard said, his voice hard, devoid of any paternal warmth. He gestured to a solitary folding chair the movers had left behind. I sat, crossing my legs casually. "What's this about?" Who is your friend? Detective Miller stepped forward, flashing a tarnished silver badge. Detective Miller, CPD. I'm going to make this quick and ugly, kid. Your father called me in as a personal favor. Richard crossed his arm, staring me down. The grief for his dying daughter was temporarily eclipsed by his desperate need for my trust fund. Chloe, Richard began, his voice dripping with malice. We know what you did. We know you hate Abigail. We know you've always been jealous of her. I tilted my head. Jealous of her heart failure? Don't play smart with me. Richard snapped, his face reddening. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Detective Miller and I went out to your car while you were walking up to the house. We searched your trunk. I maintained my calm, though I knew exactly where this was going. Without a warrant? That's illegal, Detective. Miller scoffed. A nasty, guttural sound. Warrants are for people who aren't looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Inside your trunk, wrapped in a spare tire, I found 2 kilos of pure, uncut fentanyl, a trafficking amount. I didn't have fentanyl in my trunk. I didn't even have a spare tire. I had a patch kit. It was a blatant, heavy-handed frame job. Here's how this works, Richard hissed, stepping closer, looming over me to use his physical size to intimidate me. You are going to sign this power of attorney document right now, legally transferring full control of your trust fund to an offshore LLC in my name. If you sign it, Detective Miller here is going to walk out to his cruiser, log that fentanyl as found in an abandoned alleyway on the south side, and you go free. If you don't sign it, Miller pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt and let them dangle, the metal clinking loudly in the empty room. If you don't sign it, I arrest you for narcotics trafficking. You'll be denied bail. You'll spend the best years of your life rotting in a cage. It was a bold, desperate lie. They were trying to weaponize the police to extort me. If I simply believed the lie, I believe I have drugs in my car, the universe would manifest the drugs. And I would be legitimately arrested. The power didn't care about my safety. It only cared about making the lie absolute reality. I needed to twist the blade. I needed to focus on the premise of the lie, specifically the nature of the man delivering it. I looked at the handcuffs, swinging from Miller's thick fingers. Then, I looked up at my father. I let a small, terrified gasp escape my lips. "Oh my God, Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling. I looked at Miller with wide, frightened eyes. "You're telling me that Detective Miller is a deeply corrupt officer? That he routinely fabricates evidence, extorts innocent civilians, and takes bribes?" Richard frowned, momentarily thrown off by my phrasing. "I didn't say all that," I said. I stood up, cutting him off, my voice rising, in a pitch of perfect, panicked belief. "I believe you, Dad. I believe Detective Miller is a dirty, hunted criminal who is currently the prime target of a massive, active internal affairs and FBI racketeering investigation." The hum at the base of my skull flared with such violent intensity that I tasted copper in my mouth. A shockwave of unseen energy blasted through the empty living room, rattling the window panes. Miller laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Nice try, kid. The FBI doesn't give a damn about..." The massive oak front doors exploded inward. They didn't just open, they were violently breached by a steel battering ram. The sound was deafening, echoing like a bomb blast in the empty foyer. "FBI. Nobody move. Show me your hands." A dozen heavily armed men in tactical gear swarmed into the house, laser sights cutting through the dust kicked up from the breach. They poured into the living room in a synchronized wave of black armor and assault rifles. "Down! Get on the ground! Now!" a voice roared. Miller froze, his face draining of all color. He dropped the handcuffs, his hands shooting up into the air. "Whoa! Whoa! I'm CPD. I'm on the job," he screamed, his voice cracking with sudden, absolute terror. 2 agents tackled Miller to the hardwood floor, driving a knee into his spine. They wrenched his arms behind his back, slapping heavy zip ties around his wrists. "Greg Miller, you are under arrest for federal racketeering, extortion, and evidence tampering," an agent in a windbreaker shouted, pulling a thick, sealed plastic bag out of Miller's own jacket pocket. Inside the bag were 2 bricks of white powder. The exact drugs he had claimed were in my car, now securely fastened to his own person as damning evidence of his corruption. Richard stood frozen in shock, his hands raised, his eyes wide with disbelief. This couldn't be happening. The timing was impossible. A tall, stern-looking woman wearing an FBI badge stepped into the room. She looked at Miller writhing on the floor, then turned her cold gaze to my father. "Richard Harding?" she asked. Richard swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Yes, but I have nothing to do with this. I'm just— Save it," the woman snapped. She pulled out a freshly printed warrant. "As of 2 minutes ago, our wiretaps confirmed you as a primary co-conspirator in Miller's extortion ring. Turn around and put your hands on your head." Richard looked at me. For the first time, beneath the panic and the grief, I saw a flicker of genuine, unadulterated dread in his eyes. He was finally starting to realize that he wasn't just having bad luck. He was standing in a minefield of his own making, and every time he opened his lying mouth, he stepped on a trigger. "Chloe," he whispered, as an agent grabbed him, roughly pinning his arms behind his back. I picked up my purse from the folding chair. I looked at my father, handcuffed and humiliated in the ruins of his stolen empire. "I'll call a lawyer for you, Dad," I said softly, stepping over Detective Miller's writhing legs. Just as soon as I checked my trunk, the news of my father's arrest hit the Chicago Tribune the following morning. The headline: "Prominent Oak Brook executive indicted in sweeping CPD corruption sting," was accompanied by a terribly unflattering perp walk photo of Richard Harding in handcuffs, his bespoke suit ruined by the harsh fluorescent lighting of the federal booking area. I sat at the small Formica table in my modest 2-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park, sipping a mug of black coffee and reading the article on my tablet. The FBI had seized his remaining personal assets as evidence of racketeering. The family estate, already foreclosed, was now a crime scene. Detective Greg Miller had immediately flipped, offering the feds a 30-page confession in exchange for a plea deal, throwing my father directly under the bus. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I didn't answer. 30 seconds later, a frantic pounding rattled my apartment door. "Chloe! Chloe! Open the door! Please!" I took a slow sip of my coffee, stood up, and unlocked the deadbolt. Margaret Harding pushed her way inside before I could even pull the door fully open. She looked unrecognizable. The immaculate country club matriarch was gone. Her designer clothes were wrinkled and stained, her hair was matted to one side, and she smelled faintly of cheap gin and stale sweat. She was carrying a massive leather tote bag stuffed with folders. "Mom," I said, my voice completely flat. "What are you doing here?" She slammed the door behind her and leaned against it, gasping for air as if she had run a marathon. Her eyes were wild, darting around my small living room like a cornered animal. "They froze everything, Chloe." She hyperventilated, her hands shaking violently as she dropped the tote bag on the floor. "The feds. They locked me out of the joint accounts. My credit cards are dead. I had to sleep in a motel off the interstate last night." "Me? In a motel?" "Dad is facing 20 years. I replied mildly. "I think a motel is the least of your family's problems right now." "How is Abigail?" Margaret waved her hand dismissively, a sickening gesture considering her golden child was fighting for her life in a county ward. "Cook County has her on a breathing machine. They won't let me transfer her without a massive deposit. But that doesn't matter right now. Chloe, listen to me. Your father, Richard, he's a monster." She grabbed my shoulders, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my collarbone. Her eyes were brimming with a terrifying, desperate intensity. She was about to deploy her final, most nuclear manipulation tactic. She was going to throw the husband she had enabled for 30 years to the wolves to save her own skin. "The FBI doesn't even know the half of it," Margaret hissed, lowering her voice to a dramatic, panicked whisper. "The shipping company in Singapore? The one that caused the bankruptcy? It wasn't legitimate cargo, Chloe. Your father was laundering money for the Navarro cartel." I raised an eyebrow. "The Mexican cartel?" "Yes," Margaret practically screamed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He lost $10 million of their drug money. The cartel doesn't care about the FBI or the bankruptcy. They want their money. And Richard, that cowardly bastard, he told them about your trust fund. He told them, you have the money to pay them back. She shook me, her breath hot on my face. They contacted me this morning, Chloe. They said if I don't wire them $500,000 by midnight tonight, they are going to find me, torture me, and skin me alive. I'm a dead woman. You have to sign over the trust right now so I can pay them and disappear. Please. To save your mother's life. I stared into her eyes. It was a brilliant, horrifying lie. She had taken the reality of the shipping syndicate failure, a failure I had created, and attached a deadly phantom menace to it, to extort me through pure terror. She wanted my money so she could flee the country and abandon both her husband and her dying daughter. The electric hum at the base of my skull flared, vibrating with a vicious, righteous fury. She wanted to play with monsters. I would give her monsters. Oh my God, I gasped, letting my knees buckle slightly so she had to catch my weight. I looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. The Navarro cartel? Mom, that is horrifying. They are ruthless butchers. I believe you. I believe they are actively hunting you right now. I believe your life is in imminent, catastrophic danger. The apartment went completely still. The hum in my skull erupted outward, a silent, concussive wave of energy that made the coffee in my mug ripple. Margaret let out a massive sigh of relief, her grip on my shoulders relaxing. The false tears vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating gleam. Thank you, sweetheart. I knew you wouldn't let me down. Now, log into your banking portal. I have the routing number for an offshore. Her cell phone, buried in her pocket, suddenly rang. It wasn't her standard iPhone marimba ringtone. It was a harsh, digital trill. She frowned, pulling the phone out. The screen displayed a scrambled international number from Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. Margaret's face went entirely slack. Her thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. She answered it, slowly bringing the speaker to her ear. Senora Harding? A deep, gravelly voice echoed through the tiny speaker, loud enough for me to hear in the quiet apartment. The voice was heavy with a terrifying casual menace. Your husband talks too much to the federals. He is bad for our business. We want our $10 million. You have until midnight, or we will carve your face off and mail it to your daughter. Margaret dropped the phone. It shattered on the linoleum floor. She backed away from the broken pieces, her hands covering her mouth, a silent scream tearing at her throat. The lie she had pulled from thin air to steal my inheritance had just manifested into a brutal, inescapable reality. The Navarro cartel was real. They were looking for her, and they didn't care about the FBI. Mom? I asked softly, my voice laced with fake concern. Are you okay? She didn't answer. She didn't ask for the trust fund again. She spun around, yanked the apartment door open, and ran down the hallway, sprinting for her life from a nightmare she had entirely invented. For 3 days, I heard nothing from my mother. The local news was dominated by my father's impending arraignment and the ever-expanding web of police corruption his arrest had exposed. I spent my time reorganizing my apartment, applying for marketing jobs, and ignoring the voicemails from Cook County General, updating me on Abigail's declining condition. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I received a certified letter in the mail. It was a summons to a private conference room at Chase Bank downtown. The sender was listed as Bradley Hayes, Esquire, attorney at law. I knew exactly what this was. Margaret was cornered. Hunted by a cartel that I had breathed into existence, she was desperate for cash to fund her escape. If fear didn't work on me, she would try the law. I dressed in a sharp black suit, took the L train into the Loop, and walked into the glass-paneled conference room on the 42nd floor. Margaret was sitting at the sprawling mahogany table. She looked like a ghost. She was wearing a cheap wig, oversized sunglasses, and a trench coat pulled tight around her trembling frame. Sitting next to her was a slick, greasy-haired man in a cheap suit, Bradley Hayes. He had the distinct aura of a lawyer whose primary clientele usually communicated through burner phones. Chloe, Margaret said, her voice a raspy whisper. She kept glancing nervously at the frosted glass door, terrified that a cartel hitman was going to walk through it. Mom? Mr. Hayes, I said, taking a seat directly across from them. Make this quick. I have a job interview at 3. Hayes opened a thick leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of heavily stamped legal documents. He slid them across the table toward me. He offered a predatory, yellow-toothed smile. Miss Harding, I represent your mother in the matter of your late grandfather's estate. Hayes began, using his best intimidating courtroom voice. It has come to our attention that the original trust document establishing your inheritance was executed under fraudulent pretenses. I didn't touch the papers. Is that so? Yes, Margaret chimed in, leaning forward. Chloe, we found a secret codicil in your grandfather's safety deposit box 2 days ago. He didn't want you to have the money. He felt you were too young, too irresponsible. He legally transferred the entire estate, including your current trust, directly to me upon his death. It was a blatant, desperate forgery. Margaret had clearly paid Hayes a premium to fabricate a legal loophole, hoping the threat of a massive, drawn-out probate lawsuit would terrify me into surrendering the funds. Hayes tapped the document with a gold pen. If you do not sign this waiver immediately, legally acknowledging your mother as the sole beneficiary, we will be forced to sue you for embezzlement and grand larceny. You will be tied up in litigation for decades, and your accounts will be frozen by tomorrow morning. I looked at the forged signature of my grandfather. It was a sloppy attempt. Margaret was out of time and out of options. She needed the money to flee the cartel, and she was willing to destroy me legally to get it. I leaned back in my leather chair, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. The power in my mind didn't just hum, it roared. It recognized the absolute vulnerability of her lie. A secret codicil? I asked, looking directly into Margaret's hidden, terrified eyes. He left everything to you? Yes, Margaret whispered, nodding frantically. Everything. The money is mine, Chloe. It always was. I picked up the document. I believe you, Mom. I completely believe this codicil is real and legally binding. But there's a problem. Hayes frowned, his oily confidence slipping. What problem? I locked eyes with Margaret. Grandfather didn't just leave you his assets, Mom. If this codicil is real, then you also inherit his liabilities. And I know for a fact that Grandfather died owing the IRS $12 million in unpaid back taxes and penalties from a massive, illegal offshore tax shelter. If the estate is yours, then that debt is entirely yours, too. Margaret froze. Hayes dropped his pen. Wait. What? Hayes stammered, looking at Margaret. You didn't tell me about a tax liability. Because it's a lie! Margaret shrieked, ripping off her sunglasses. He didn't owe the IRS anything. He was audited before he died. No, Mom, I said smoothly, my voice echoing with unnatural, commanding resonance. I believe you. The codicil is real. You inherit everything, including the $12 million of federal tax debt. The conference room air pressure plummeted so violently that my ears popped. The heavy mahogany table shuddered. The lie was sealed. The reality was overwritten. At that exact second, Hayes's laptop, open on the table, emitted a loud, sharp chime. He looked down at the screen, his face draining of blood. What is it? Margaret demanded, her voice cracking. My escrow account, Hayes whispered, typing frantically. The bank just executed an automatic, zero-balance sweep. It's an IRS federal levy. Margaret grabbed the laptop, staring at the screen. The screen displayed a massive, glaring red notification from the Internal Revenue Service, confirming the immediate seizure of all assets tied to Margaret Harding's Social Security number, including the trust fund she had just successfully, magically transferred into her name. Her balance was negative, $12 million. No, Margaret sobbed, slamming the laptop shut. No, no, no. Chloe, fix it. Tell them it's a lie. I can't fix the truth, Mom, I said softly, standing up and smoothing my skirt. You own the trust. And you owe the government $12 million. Oh, and by the way, when the IRS seizes your assets, they publish the seizure in the public federal registry. Anyone tracking your financials, say, an angry cartel looking for their $10 million now, knows exactly where you are, and that you are completely, irrevocably broke. Margaret let out a sound that wasn't human. It was the primal, harrowing shriek of a woman realizing she was trapped in a cage with no exit, surrounded by wolves. She had nothing left. Her husband was in federal prison, her daughter was rotting in a public ward. The government had seized her life, and the cartel was coming to collect. I turned my back on her and walked out of the conference room, leaving her screams to echo against the glass. The debt was paid, the scale was balanced, and I was finally free. The dust settled over the Harding family legacy with astonishing speed. Over the next 2 weeks, my father's face became a staple on the nightly news, a symbol of corporate greed and municipal corruption. He was denied bail, deemed a flight risk due to his newfound terrifying ties to the Navarro cartel. As for Margaret, she had simply vanished. Her Lexus was found abandoned at O'Hare International Airport, but her passport had never been scanned. Whether she was hiding in a ditch or in the trunk of a cartel enforcer's car, I didn't know, and I truly didn't care. I thought I was finished. I thought the slate was wiped clean. But a parasite rarely dies without trying to take its host down with it. On a Tuesday morning, I received a call from a frantic social worker at Cook County General. Abigail had woken up. Due to the lack of funds and the criminal investigations surrounding our family, the hospital was preparing to transfer her to a long-term, state-run care facility. A state-run facility, the exact type of place where I had died in my past life. The poetry of it was almost too perfect. I decided to visit her one last time. Not out of love, but out of a need for absolute closure. The ward smelled of stale urine and institutional despair. I walked past rows of groaning patients until I reached Abigail's bed in the corner. She looked hollowed out. The vibrant, arrogant influencer who only wore Prada was gone, replaced by a skeletal, pale girl hooked up to a noisy ventilator and a web of IV drips. When she saw me, her eyes widened. For a second, I thought I saw relief. But then, the familiar, toxic calculation crept into her gaze. Even on death's door, Abigail was a Harding. "Chloe," she croaked, her voice weak and raspy. I pulled up a plastic chair and sat beside the bed, crossing my legs. "Hello, Abigail. You look terrible." She winced, her bony hands gripping the thin, scratchy bedsheet. "Where is Mom? Where's Dad?" "The nurses won't tell me anything. They said my credit cards were declined. Dad is in federal prison facing 20 years. I stated plainly. Mom owes the IRS $12 million and is currently on the run from a Mexican drug cartel. Our house is gone. The money is gone. It's just you and me now." Abigail stared at me, her mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the destruction. Then, she did what she had always done. She looked for a way to make it my fault and my responsibility. Her eyes narrowed. A sudden, vicious burst of energy seemed to animate her frail body. "This is your fault," she hissed, her monitor beeping faster. "You did this. You hoarded your money while we suffered. You suffered because you built a life on lies." I replied coldly. "I'm not going to a state facility, Chloe." She sneered, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. She reached over and hit the red call button on her bedside table. "You have your trust fund. You're going to pay for me to go to a private clinic in Switzerland. If you don't, I'm going to ruin you." I leaned forward. "And how exactly are you going to do that from a county hospital bed?" 2 nurses and a hospital security guard stepped into the ward, responding to the call button. Abigail looked at them, then looked back at me. She burst into violent, hysterical tears. It was the same flawless performance our mother used to give. "Help me," Abigail screamed to the nurses, pointing a trembling skeletal finger at me. "Arrest her, please. She's the reason I'm in here." My heart didn't just fail, she pushed me. She pushed me down the stairs at our house because she wanted my inheritance. She broke my back. I can't feel my legs. I'm completely paralyzed because of her. The nurses gasped, exchanging horrified looks. The security guard placed his hand on his radio, stepping cautiously toward me. It was a brilliant, horrific, desperate lie. Abigail knew the police were already investigating our family. If she claimed attempted murder and framed my presence at the house as an assault, she could drag me down into the legal abyss with them. She was willing to fake paralysis to start a high-profile victim campaign, leveraging public sympathy to force me into a settlement. I looked at her legs beneath the thin sheet. I knew she could feel them. She had been shifting her feet just moments ago. The hum at the base of my skull didn't just wake up. It screamed. It recognized the ultimate betrayal. The sister who had drained my life in the past was trying to steal my freedom in the present. I stood up slowly. I didn't defend myself to the nurses. I didn't panic. I looked down at Abigail's crying, lying face. "You're right," I whispered, my voice dripping with a terrifying, absolute sorrow that echoed in the quiet ward. "I am so sorry, Abigail. I believe you. I believe your spine was completely and permanently severed in the fall. I believe you will never, ever feel your legs again." The air in the ward cracked like a whip. A heavy, invisible weight slammed down onto Abigail's bed. Abigail stopped crying. Her mouth opened in a silent O of sudden, incomprehensible shock. She looked down at the bedsheets. "Wait!" She gasped, her hands flying to her thighs. She dug her fingernails into her skin. Nothing. She punched her own kneecap. Nothing. The lie had become a permanent, horrifying truth. The nerve pathways in her spinal cord had instantly and irrevocably vanished. I can't," she stammered, her eyes bulging with genuine, mind-shattering terror. She looked up at the nurses. "I can't feel my legs. I actually can't feel my legs. Oh my God! Help me!" The nurses rushed forward, completely ignoring me as they began to examine her, pricking her feet with a safety pin, drawing no reaction. I stepped back, smoothing out my coat. "You heard her," I said to the security guard, my voice perfectly steady. "It's a tragic medical complication from her heart failure. Please make sure she gets comfortable in the state facility. She's going to be sitting in that chair for the rest of her life." I turned and walked out of the ward. Behind me, the golden child's screams of genuine agony echoed down the linoleum hallway, a fitting soundtrack to the end of the Harding family. The final legal proceedings took 6 months to untangle. Because attorney Bradley Hayes was indicted by the FBI for wire fraud and conspiracy alongside my father, the forged codicil transferring my trust fund to Margaret was thrown out of federal court. The bank reversed the hold, and my grandfather's original, unblemished millions were securely transferred into a private account under my sole control. Margaret's debt to the IRS, however, remained. The reality I had manifested anchored itself to her social security number, not the forged paperwork. She was a ghost, with a $12 million bounty on her head. 2 months after she fled my apartment, Mexican authorities found a burned-out Lexus matching her plates in the Sonoran Desert. The DNA on the driver's seat was a match. The Navarro cartel always collected their debts. Richard Harding stood before a federal judge in late spring. Without his high-priced lawyers, he looked like exactly what he was, a pathetic, hollow man. The judge handed down a 25-year sentence in a maximum security penitentiary. He would die behind bars, bankrupt and forgotten. Abigail was transferred to the street. Jude's palliative care center, the exact same facility where I had drawn my last breath in my previous life. Without my money to fund her private care, she was just another ward of the state. She was permanently paralyzed from the waist down, her failing heart keeping her bedridden and dependent on the charity of overworked nurses. I visited her once, anonymously, standing outside her window on the ground floor. I watched her staring blankly at the water stains on the acoustic ceiling tiles, trapped in a decaying body, abandoned by the world. The scale was finally perfectly balanced. As I walked away from the hospice center, a strange sensation washed over me. The electric hum at the base of my skull, the heavy, dark vibration that had been my constant companion since the morning. I woke up in the past, suddenly fluttered, and then vanished. It faded into nothingness, like a radio being clicked off. The power was gone. It had served its purpose. The universe had given me a weapon to survive a family of vipers. And now that the vipers were dead or caged, the weapon was no longer needed. I wasn't a god of reality anymore. I was just Chloe. I bought a small, beautiful house on the coast of Maine, far away from the toxic suburbs of Chicago. I invested my trust fund into a small publishing house, focusing on giving a voice to survivors of domestic and financial abuse. I surrounded myself with people who meant what they said, people whose words didn't hide hidden daggers. Sometimes I sit on my porch with a cup of Earl Grey tea, listening to the crash of the ocean waves against the rocky shore. I think about the life I left behind, the cold hospice bed, the mountain of debt, and the cruel laughter of my parents. Then, I take a deep breath of the salty, clean air, grateful for the impossible second chance I was given. I let my biased parents lie to me, and in doing so, I let them build their own perfect, inescapable hell. And that is exactly how Chloe systematically dismantled the people who tried to destroy her, using nothing but their own toxic words against them. From a cartel manhunt to a federal prison sentence, the Hardings learned the hard way that the truth will always catch up to you, especially when you're dealing with someone who can rewrite reality. What did you think of Abigail's final, desperate attempt to frame Chloe? And the chilling, poetic justice of where she ended up? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and share it with a friend who appreciates a brutal, calculating revenge story. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, so you never miss our next deep dive into the darkest corners of family drama. Drop a comment below. If you had Chloe's power for 24 hours, what is the first lie you would make come true?